Emmanuel.
All right. As Maharat said, this Parashah is called Yitro. But I wonder if anyone ever considered why would this be called Yitro? Well, I looked at that. Yitro means Jethro to us in English. Why would we take the first significant word and make it Jethro? And I began to realize this was no coincidence. Let's start with the fact that, let's go ahead and get started. This is actually a family story. Love between a man and a woman goes through stages. For a man, that first stage is seeing a woman. It happens in the sight. Next comes an attraction. For some mammals, it's the sound or the cry. But for men, it's sometimes the voice. Pretty much in humans, it's what she says and how she says it. What happens next has been studied for centuries, but no one can figure it out and lay it out step by step. Biochemical reactions take place, and two people find themselves drawn to one another. It's a temporary insanity. Poets say the sun shines brighter, colors appear brilliant, the music sounds more detailed. Is it the same for everyone? No. However it happens for you, male or female, the world is never the same. That euphoria is a chemical reaction that binds two people together. This much we know. But as any married couple will tell you, sometimes the chemistry breaks down and it must be rekindled. God describes Israel using terms of love and marriage. I believe it's safe to say that this great majestic king sees the children of Israel as his beloved among all the nations. This is clear in the Ketubah, or the books of the writings, and it's all over the prophets. In fact, if you haven't read the Torah and understand it, you cannot see the true meaning of the writings of the prophets. Your vision will be focused on a vengeful God who cast his people Israel out to one empire after another and causes them distress. But that has never been the case and never will be. God has not cast out his people Israel. But if you truly read and understand Exodus and the way a man loves a woman, you will understand the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel with a much greater, clearer understanding. Yitro, which is translated as Jethro, is Moses' father-in-law. So this reading starts out with Moses' father-in-law giving wise advice to his son-in-law, the man who's in charge of preparing the bride, the children of Israel. Yes, Moses has gone against the world's greatest superpower, and he's defeated the empire with God's help. He's led away the entire workforce and quite a few captives of war, which the Torah calls a mixed multitude. Now it's time for Moses, the man, to take back his wife and kids. So Jethro, delivers Zipporah and the boys back to the family. There's a big feast with the elders of the tribes, all gathered together for a meal. Now, one thing you'll notice about God is that he ratifies his contracts with a meal. These meals all have a symbolism and meaning, and foremost in all of them is always bread. Why bread? Why not potatoes or meat or something that grows up out of the ground? You know the answer. Think back to the Garden of Eden. It's like God is saying to you, you will grow crops. You will grind grains. You will combine them with water. And you will bake them with fire. And you will make bread. Bread is not found in nature. It must be planned for, grown, tended, watered, ground up, and kneaded. Each time this is done, we will remember that we are children of God and not primates who pick berries, leaves, and insects. Bread is in the tabernacle and it's essential to the priesthood. As a matter of fact, during the days of Passover, the days of unleavened bread, bread is still there, but it's changed in composition. Our fathers ate man in the desert, as it says in the Tanakh. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Yeshua said to them, yes, indeed. I tell you, it wasn't Moses who gave you bread from heaven, but my Father is giving you the genuine bread from heaven. For God's bread is the one who comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world. That's in John 6:31-33. Let me repeat a few things. Yes, indeed, I tell you that it wasn't Moses who gave you the bread from heaven. Think for a moment. My Father is giving you the genuine bread from heaven. For God's bread is the one who comes down out of heaven, just as man came down out of heaven and gives life to the world, to the whole world. Every time you make bread, and I love making bread from scratch, some of you know this, I'm reminded that bread is symbolic of an unbreakable connection to our Father. Yeshua said, I am the bread which is life. I am the bread which is life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever trusts in me will never be thirsty. That's in John 6:35. In Yitro, God doesn't give us just give us a family reunion or and a wedding feast. He also does something unique that we do in Jewish marriages to this day. Let me share an experience with you. When I worked at the yeshiva in New Jersey, one of my best friends was a young rabbi in training. We rode to work every day. We sang songs together every day. We even shopped together. We bought kosher, he bought kosher, and I bought similar foods, but not always kosher. After the checkout, we compared receipts. Kosher meats were about several times higher. We'd have a good laugh, and then we would jump in the car and share a bag of chips on the way home. I know why kosher meat is more expensive. I had to help the children at the school catch chicken. Now, these were dead chickens brought in by a farmer. And in the process of going through kashrut, we had to cut the chickens open. We had to examine each one of their organs. And it's actually a very funny story, so I won't go into that right now, but let's just say it was very exciting for the kids. But it was a valuable lesson for me. Anyway, I was around when my friend fell in love. He was a different man. I was there when he learned to play the piano and to compose a song he wanted to sing. He wanted to sing it to his beloved. When he got married, I was accepted in the room with the men who signed the Ketubah, or marriage contract. I was treated as one of the family. And just about everyone in the room and everyone at the marriage thought I would one day become a Jew. God does something similar with the children of Israel. He writes a binding contract before he enters into a spiritual marriage with the children of Israel. Make no mistake about it. The children of Israel, and by extension the believers of Yeshua, are entered into a binding spiritual contract. We are his, and he is ours. This brings us to the mountain in this reading. I won't get into discussions about where the mountain is located. Some people think it's in the Sinai Peninsula. Others say Saudi Arabia. Shaul, Paul the Apostle, says in Galatians 4 that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. And it's in Arabia that he spent time after his conversion. Elijah also fled to Mount Horeb in Arabia, where he intended to retire the rest of his days, but we all know God had other plans. That was in 1 Kings 19. People go crazy with this in modern times. But Arabia is not Saudi Arabia, but rather a larger area starting in Edom's territory and going south midway through modern-day Saudi Arabia. There were a lot of pre-Islamic kingdoms there, including the Nabateans, who built Petra. Now, if you're not familiar with any of these terms, this is where you need to study. The Nabateans and Petra are in Edom's territory. South of ancient Arabia, most of ancient Arabia was north of what we call Saudi Arabia today. So if you want to spend your money to go and see some of the relics that people sell and guard and protect, consider that you might need to study a little bit better about history before you make that trip to the southern part of Saudi Arabia. In Exodus 19, Moses went up to God, and Adonai called out to him from the mountain. Here is what you are to say to the household of Yaakov, and to tell the people of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now listen to this. Now, if you will pay careful attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you will be a kingdom of Kohen for me, a nation set apart, a kingdom of priests. These are the words you are to speak to the people of Israel. It's in Exodus 19, verses 3 through 6. A ketubah is a marriage contract. It's a covenant. It's more weightier than an agreement. In this slideshow, there is a picture of a ketubah. You'll notice that on one side is, let's go, there we go. On one side, you'll see Aramaic, because most of the people, the ketubah was developed during the Middle Ages, when it was very important that we have contracts and property. And most of the people spoke Aramaic. Much of the Talmud is written in Aramaic. And on the other side, in modern English, you'll see the other side. You'll see the marriage contract written out so that people can fully understand what they're getting into, young people and the community, because it's not a simple contract of vows between a man and a woman. It's a community contract. Just like my rabbi friend, the men in his community gathered in a separate room where the contract was ratified by a rabbi. There were certain binding conditions in the ketubah. Again, I won't go into those right now in detail, but I will say that there are certain things that a woman is in charge of, including her body. And there are certain things that a man is obligated to do. You can't just divorce your wife. You can't just walk away the way we do today. In Exodus, the leaders and the elders were gathered, and Moses declared what God had proposed to the children of Israel, just like the community gathered in that separate room. And what did they say? They said, everything Adonai has said, we will do. God took those words, and next he set up the spiritual wedding of the people. In a usual wedding, it's a closed affair with limited attendance. But this spiritual wedding was not a closed affair. It was declared publicly on a mountaintop, with angels and all the people gathered below, including a mixed multitude, and with thunder and fire, and maybe even the host of heaven present. In all my studies of other religions, never has a God spoken in the hearing of an entire nation. Virtually every other religion has a private encounter with a prophet, sometimes in a cave, often in dreams and in visions. And for this study, I went back and I reviewed most of the religions that I know of. And it's 100% true. Even Islam acknowledges that God appeared on the mountain and spoke to the people in the hearing of the entire nation. In Exodus 19, starting in verse 16, on the morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning, and a thick cloud on the mountain. Then a shofar blast sounded so loudly that all the people in the camp trembled. Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They stood near the base of the mountain. Mount Sinai was enveloped in smoke because Adonai had descended onto it in fire. His smoke went up like the smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the sound of the shofar grew louder and louder, Moshe spoke, and God answered him with a voice. Adonai came down onto Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. Now let me share my opinion here. What God did at Sinai was something new. It was the beginning of the kingdom of God on earth. God, who is without limitation, who is beyond the laws of the universe that he created, came to a mountain. He's outside of time and space. He is eternal. But he came to a mountain to speak to his people. All the people experienced the thunder, the lightning, the sound of the shofar, and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they trembled. Standing at a distance, they said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will listen. But don't let God speak with us, or we will die." Moshe answered the people, "Don't be afraid, because God has come only to test you and to make you fear him, so that you won't commit sins." So the people stood at a distance, but Moshe approached the thick darkness where God was. Exodus 20:15-18. When a child is hurting, the best thing you can do is drop to your knees, cracking joints and all, lower your face, and look that child in their teary eyes, and let them know you see them. In that moment, you and your child are one. In the same fashion, the groom, Adonai, bent down like a man humbling himself to the one he loves, to say, "I am yours and you are mine. Let's walk together." The children of Israel could not grasp that fact. So they said, "God, speak to us through a man." In that moment, God granted his beloved's wish. Yeshua came to us as both a man and God. The one on the mountain became a man born of a woman. And his beloved, Israel, could not understand how God could become a man. You see, it was more comfortable believing God can be a cloud or a bush, but never a man. We still struggle with this. It was a stumbling block to the Jewish scribes and sages in Yeshua's time. It is still a stumbling block for many Christians. It is a stumbling block for Islam, who also acknowledges that Yeshua came and that he is only a prophet. But what did Yeshua say? "For if you really believed Moses, you would believe me, because it is about me that he wrote." You can explain that any way you want to, but those are his words. If you really believe Moses, you would believe me, because it was about me that he wrote. That's in John 5:46. He simplified it for his disciples. Yeshua said to Philip, "Have I been with you so long without your knowing me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" It's John 14:9. "Trust me," Yeshua said, "that I am united with the Father and the Father united with me. But if you can't, then trust because of the works themselves." That was John 14:11. We like to say that we received the 10 Commandments, but read on after the 10 Commandments. God does not continue to have, let me rephrase that. Does God continue to have additional words? Yes, he does. The people could only bear to hear 10 statements. And by the way, in the scriptures, you will not see the word commandment. You'll see words in Hebrew. And even in the Greek, they don't use the word commandment. They use intole, which actually has, in the Greek, has the form of an order, a charge, a precept, an injunction. And it also means a command. So God does continue to have additional words. He wasn't finished with those 10 statements. When men break up the chapter, we break up the sections of reading, and we decide there's a pause here and there's a pause there. But I encourage you today to go back and read that chapter. And don't pause where the men break the chapter. Continue reading. We'll see that the mitzvah did not stop at 10. After the service and into the week, read past that chapter. Read past the 10 commandments, and see if God is not continuing the way of life he expects us in chapters 21 and beyond. These are marriage vows. They continue until chapter 24. They don't end in Exodus 20. If you take the time to read the rest of this reading, you'll see how God has dealt with not only the issues of the ancient children of Israel, but also how those living words can be translated and give us peace today in our families and among our neighbors. Now, granted, you'll see passages referring to slaves. We don't have slaves in modern times, thanks largely to the Jewish people. But we have employees and employers, something that Paul also mentions. We don't allow grown men to rape young women in modern times. These are considered crimes. But we have nice boys who go on dates with young women. And the principle is the same. We don't have time in a sermon to turn all the precepts into modern equivalents. I studied with the rabbi for several months doing that in in the seminary. And then later at a shul in Manhattan, in a class that lasted for several months with the rabbi, taking each precept and going through them one by one and showing how they apply today. Yeshua came to expand upon these precepts, to expound what was said to Moses on the mountain. And he is the greatest teacher. He is our true rabbi. The Gospels are our textbooks, not written for Christians, but for all who ratified the contract at Sinai and all who are yet to ratify the contract. There is an extension of the marriage in Exodus, but they continue in the discussion. If you've been called and you're part of the bride, grafted into the children of Israel, then we too have entered into a Ketubah with God, established at Sinai. It's very different from the word covenant and contract. It's a Ketubah. It's a binding contract with clauses and expectations. This is our heritage. Read past the commandments in Exodus 20 and notice how the holy days are part of the commandments. That might be a shock for some, especially those who are Christians, who've lived as Christians their whole lives, and they were taught the 10 commandments are what we're expected to do. And yet, God continues the discussion, and he includes the holy days. None of these things have been abolished. Even though Yeshua paid the penalty for our failures, for our sins, they are the terms of the Sinai Ketubah. Those are my words, the Sinai Ketubah. And the groom still lives and still expects his bride to clean herself up and make herself ready for the wedding feast yet to come. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Beautiful.